Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Hey everyone, welcome to the High Rise. My co-host and better half of this podcast, Emily Paxia, is out this week, so I thought I'd use this opportunity to dig into the archives to bring back a classic poolside session. In fact, we haven't done any poolsides all year, which is certainly something I'm going to have to fix. This particular poolside is with Representative Nancy Mace, who represents the South Carolina's 1st Congressional District. Now, I want to travel back in time a bit to just over a year ago, April 2022, when we recorded this. Safe banking is on the horizon. I mean, it's April after all, and we have all year. The 2022 elections are coming up in November, so let's get the show on the road before some sort of lame duck session might occur. Well, fast forward to October 2022, and you had Chuck Schumer, Senate Majority Leader, saying that the bill was very close. And then that led to what we all remember as Safe Banking Plus. Ultimately, come December, nothing had happened, and there was talk about attaching it to the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act during the lame duck session. And we all know how that turned out, right? Not introduced at all. So fast forwarding back to this year and to this week, with SAFE being introduced in the Senate via the bipartisan group and scheduled for an actual hearing this week on May 11th. I mean, we're talking just a few days away. I wanted to revisit this conversation with Nancy Mace. If you listen to last week's podcast, we highlighted a lot of the risks, I think, that facing current safe banking, and I think all of that still applies. This weekend, in fact, this past weekend, Schumer doubled down on adding social equity provisions at a speech during the 2023 New York City Cannabis Parade and Rally in New York. We'll put a link to that talk or that speech in the show notes. It was published on YouTube, so you guys can hear it firsthand. I still think that, there is some risk there. That's what we saw happen before. Obviously, it's an important thing, but it really is a tricky tightrope to walk, right? If we're talking about, banking specifically here. So we'll see, what happens there. But I think that is still a risk. I think there's also like a political risk. And Emily pointed this out to me, prior to this recording, just a thought that she had, given what happened with the Veteran Affairs Department and the studies and clinical trial bill that failed to move forward. That really failed in a big way because of the potential to be shown as a big win, is what they were saying, for Senator John Tester, who chairs the Veterans Affairs Committee and is up for re-election in Montana. And so, and they didn't want to have that look like a win, and so it failed. So, you've got politics involved. And what Emily pointed out was that there is a similar risk here with the Banking Committee Chair Brown also running for re-election in 2024. So there could be seen as, getting SAFE passed as a big win. Some bipartisan bill could be a big win, which would be really a disappointing way for it not to move forward. But I think, an interesting thing to call out here. So all that said, this really sets the stage for the discussion with Representative Mace. I think this conversation is still as relevant today as it was over a year ago. She's one of the few outspoken proponents on federal reform when it comes to cannabis, and this poolside discussion was one of our favorites. So enjoy. We'll be back next week with our regular scheduled programming and hopefully with some good news and progress after the scheduled hearing on SAFE. We'll see you then. Welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-back conversation where we talk all things cannabis, from U.S. MSOs to Canadian LPs, products and market analysis through the lens of data. My name is Cy Scott with Headset, and I'm joined as always by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Rise.
And today we have a very special poolside session at Benzinga here in Miami with a very special guest, U.S. Congressman Nancy Mace of South Carolina. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nancy.
And thank you for having me. This wind and sun and pool air is pretty awesome down here in Miami at Benzinga.
Yeah.
It is nice to get out of the conference and kind of be out here. I've got to admit, I've spent most of the day out here.
Not me. Happy to be here.
Tomorrow might be a little different, but yeah, it's great. It's just great to be here. So I'd love to start with just your kind of origins and really what brought you to the federal cannabis issue.
Yeah, and first I want to say thank you all for having me on today. I'm a freshman Republican member of Congress in D.C. from Charleston, South Carolina. I represent South Carolina's 1st congressional district. I'd even say I'm conservative before I'm even Republican, which is probably you're scratching your head out. As a conservative, I support cannabis so much. But I have a very, I guess, challenged early life. I was raped when I was 16. And shortly after this event in my life, I dropped out of school. And my parents, my dad's a retired Army general, my mom's a retired school teacher. They're like, if you're going to stop going to school, you got to start going to work. And I started a job as a waitress at a Waffle House on the side of the interstate. It's not why I'm wearing bright yellow today. I do love Waffle House yellow, by the way. But I learned some really tough lessons during some tough times. But this time in my life, I dropped out of school. I was a Waffle House waitress. I'd been prescribed antidepressants from my doctor. And I felt like my antidepressants made my depression worse, not better. And I wanted to end everything. And thank God I did not. Thank God I got off the prescription drugs and I started self-medicating with cannabis. Didn't know at the time at 17 that was a thing, that was what I was doing. All I knew is that it cut my anxiety down. I was able to sleep at night and I could function. I could go to a job, couldn't go to school, but I could go to a job and be a functioning member of society, contributing to our society. And I credit it with saving my life. Now I'm 44. You fast forward. After that time in my life, I would eventually get my diploma. I'd go on to college. I became the first woman to graduate from the Citadel, the military college of South Carolina. I would have never been able to do that had I ended everything. And I credit these experiences in my life for giving me the passion and the drive and the purpose to do what I do, because I'm fully committed in everything that I dive into. There's no half-assery. Like, it's either 0 or 100. There's like no other speed that I have in life. And so those life experiences that I had, really made who I am today. So I was elected to the State House in South Carolina in 2018. I served 3 years there. And I was a co-sponsor of the medical cannabis bill, the Compassionate Care Act, which, by the way, is being led by Republicans in South Carolina doing cannabis. Like, you can't, some people want to think this is strictly a Democrat-led issue. It's not. I mean, cannabis is as American as apple pie. And it's everything from the socialists on the left to the QAnon on the right, the full spectrum. Everybody, no matter your political affiliation, feel very similar about cannabis. And so I was a sponsor of that bill, met a lot of people. And when I got elected to Congress in November of 2020, I ran on this promise. It was a campaign promise that I made. It was an issue that I would work on. I won my district by 1 point. As a conservative, I represent not just conservatives, I represent everybody across the political divide. And it took us about 9 months to really dive in on States Reform Act and his bill that I filed in November of last year. But it's an issue I've been a part of, you could say, almost my entire life, and something I have personally felt. And so when you talk to people, there are a lot of different reasons that they use, or that they have a medical card or whatever. But I for those that are PTSD, that are veterans, like, I feel that pain. I've had that pain. I know what that feels like. For the kid that's got epilepsy and cerebral palsy and can't function, has 2,000 seizures an hour, seeing what cannabis can do to literally change their life. I mean, that is real. And I've seen that and been a part of trying to make that better for people around the country.
It's really great to hear your story. I mean, I'm very sorry to hear your story, but
Not
I'm
your
really
fault, but
grateful that you shared it, because these are the types of things that drove a lot of us to get into the industry, is some connection to why cannabis really matters and why it's not what people have tried to program us to think it is on the stigma side. And so I'm really glad to hear your story, that you're so willing to share the kind of the history of how you view this and why you're so drawn to focus on it. And I also can say, I mean, cannabis has been a little bit of a story of Heartbreak City, around promises around supporting the issue and then kind of abandoning it. So again, just really grateful that you've continued to carry the ball down the field.
Promises made and promises not kept, right? I mean, that is a frustration. I hate politics, I will tell you. I think it's a lot of bullshit. It's a lot of BS. But that's the reason I got in this gig, because I was sick and tired of seeing people who ran on something and said they were going to do something and then not do anything about it. Like, what are you talking about? They're especially during COVID right now, people are struggling. People are really challenged. What do they do? How do they overcome their challenges? Kids being out of school, people being out of work. And it's like, what are we doing to make the everyday hardworking man and woman and child, what are we doing to make their lives better? Like, what are we doing?
And one of the points that you made too is, like, it's an anecdote, right? But what we're seeing is the anecdote is also building into real data sets around the positive impacts of cannabis. And one of the things that came out 2 days ago Marijuana Moment posted it, which is a great industry resource about where cannabis is legalized. We see a decrease in things and pharmaceuticals around depression, anxiety, PTSD. And this is the change we're looking to see. And it's statistically significant. So I'm excited to see this.
And I saw that article, and I encourage everyone to go and look it up, Google it, read it, or DuckDuckGo, whatever you're using to search for these days. But go look it up and see that data, because it's real. And I, in fact, had a debate on Monday, because I have a primary and a general election, but I had a debate on Monday, and had a woman come up to me with all these statistics, all this information that just was flat out wrong.
Yeah.
And I was like, nope, that's not true. And so, but now we have more data than ever that prove to us what we've all known for thousands of years, that this is not an on-ramp, it's an off-ramp. Kids aren't more exposed, people aren't more violent. And in fact, this can save lives. And I was talking to this woman on Monday, and I'm like, honey, it's already here. I got access to it at 17.
Right.
Anytime I wanted it, I could get it, got it illegally. We didn't have the fentanyl issues that we have today. And I have to have these conversations with my kids who have friends who might have teenagers in middle school and high school. They have friends that cannot drive and are coming to school high. So it's not working. What you think is working isn't. And our kids, mine included, are exposed to it every single day. And I don't want kids dying from a fentanyl overdose.
No.
Like, people need to be educated on what's going on and what's not, and how this is really harming our communities, everywhere.
Exactly.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the state's Reform Act? I know there's a lot of legislation that's been proposed, and what's unique about the state's Reform Act, and why do you think it's the right way forward for the country?
Yeah, I worked on this bill for about 9 months, and there really isn't anything like it that's in Congress right now. It's the only Republican bill endorsed, I think, by both sides. I had Normal endorse it. We had Americans for Prosperity, both left and right. And then we had Amazon endorse it at the beginning of the year, not because they want to sell online, but because it affects about 10% of their hiring pool, which, oh, by the way, is 100,000 people. So if you use and you're duly qualified for a job, prohibition shouldn't keep you from doing that job, right? We got supply chain issues. We got all kinds of things. We all want our Amazon packages delivered on time. Let's get going here. But there was really nothing like it. You've got bills. You had the MORE Act. You had other bills. You had what may or may not end up being CAO, or it might just be the ghost of CAO. We don't know yet. But nothing really brought together both sides. And if you're going to do cannabis reform at the federal level, you have to have a bipartisan bill, both Republicans and Democrats supporting it. It has to be bicameral, meaning you've got to be able to pass it out of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate, which has a much higher threshold, a much higher bar to get through to do that. And you can't do that by being partisan. That's just not the way it's going to work. And you can't just, quote, legalize it at the federal level, because that doesn't work either. You can't get Republicans on board with that. So having a state-driven bill that protects the rights of states to do cannabis reform at whatever level that they want, or prohibit it. And by the way, there are only 3, soon to be only 2 states that have nothing at all. Like my home state of South Carolina, we have CBD. Florida, where we are today, they have medical cards. Obviously, Colorado is full adult use. But every state's different, and respecting the rights of states, because that's what people want. By and large, this is a 70-30 issue. So my bill is a states' rights, federalism, really driven bill, allowing states to do whatever they want at whatever level. Let's legalize it for that state. We're going to deschedule it, but to deschedule it, you also have to decriminalize it. So there's that component, but my bill only touches the federal side of it, not states. States, again, can decriminalize at the state level, giving states the power, social equity, state-driven, not at the federal level. And this is how you get Republicans and Democrats on board. And the other thing that my bill has that, for example, MORE doesn't have, but I've got guardrails for kids. I mean, nobody wants to see their kids marketed, advertised, or sold to. So there are financial incentives, AKA we take away a percentage of your infrastructure funding, which no one can afford to lose, to incentivize states to not sell to kids, to not market to kids, to not advertise to them. I have protections in there for veterans. So if you're a veteran, you have PTSD, you can go to any VA in the country, no matter where you are, and get it prescribed. And oh, by the way, we cannot discriminate against you at work. And then the last thing is that, this bill is unique because there's a federal framework for regulations. And it treats cannabis like alcohol. And so it's turnkey. So if you're a grower, you'd go through ag. If you're a retailer, you go through TTB. If you need small business financing, you go to SBA. If you're medical, you go to FDA. I mean, all these things. So you treat it like an alcohol company. That regulatory framework is already there, and that is also unique to the bill. It's got really low taxes. You can't do cannabis, right? If you have super high taxes. I think I heard someone earlier from California today said, 20% of cannabis in California is legal. The other 80's illegal markets. And it's because the taxes are so damn high. And so it's got a really low 3% federal excise tax to help, prohibit and prevent black markets, illegal markets from popping up all over the country.
Yeah.
We want to incentivize legal operations, legal businesses, doing business legally.
That all sounds extremely practical to me. I'm like, we can use existing infrastructure. We can treat these companies like businesses. We don't have to kill them with death by 1,000 cuts of taxes. And yeah, I'm very pro small business and independent businesses growing and flourishing in this country. And I think that all sounds like it could actually facilitate that. And I do like the approach of allowing the states to then take it to the level that they want to. It's funny, when I was on the board of the Marijuana Policy Project back in the day, one of the things we were like, just take it state by state, because that's the best we can do, especially at that time. And I feel like this is kind of completing the other end of that, because then the industry can keep working on each state, but then there's also this federal layer.
Essentially, it's the bookend to a massive multi-billion-dollar issue. You can't have a multi-billion-dollar industry like we have today and operate in cash. Like, what are you talking about? How dangerous is this? And oh, by the way, you're incentivizing Mexican drug cartels, to go to Oregon because, it's just, it's just so crazy the way we've done this. And we're literally funding drug cartels by allowing them to bring drugs illegally across the border. This fixes so many issues in the drug war. It's part of it's educating and data and information and getting those statistics out to people, their districts, their communities, their states, and saying, this is not what you think this is. And oh, by the way, the world didn't end. And people aren't getting arrested for violent crimes. You should be more worried about alcoholism and people driving drunk and criminal domestic violence happening when you are drunk. I mean, that is palpable. I mean, alcohol is a very, very, very highly addictive substance. So it's just, do the right thing.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem so common sense when you put it all together like that. How has the response been, like, from like a bipartisan perspective? I mean, how can anybody argue otherwise, basically?
Yeah, I mean, they can, and they do try.
They find ways.
Yeah, they find ways to
will,
wiggle their way out of it, and it's like, nobody, we're going to corner you on this one. But Democrats wanted to get more done. They wanted to get more done a second time. They did that. So when we go back into session starting next week, more is a stalemate. It's not going anywhere in the Senate, unfortunately. We tried to have some amendments. I was willing to try to build consensus and say, well, can we bring parity? Can we merge our two bills together? And not a single Republican amendment was allowed on the MORE Act, only Democrat amendments. And I'm like, okay, do you really want to do this, or are we just going to talk about it for the next 20 years? And so I'm willing to work with anyone who's willing to work with me. So we're going back. When we go back in session, we're going to start adding Democrats to the bill. We had 5 Republican original co-sponsors, the most of any Republican cannabis bill ever in the history. It doesn't sound like a lot, but for us, it is. But we're going to add 1 for 1 Democrat for 1 Republican. And as Republicans get through their primaries, because everyone's scared of this issue, the only place this is controversial is in D.C. It ain't controversial in the rest of the country.
That's right.
But as Republicans start going through their primaries, you'll see more Republicans added to the bill. And the Republican pushback is really more or less like, hey, what's this expungement and release thing? I think I'm going to rename it safe expungement and release, because when I tell people it's nonviolent, not drug cartel gang members, not DUIs, it only affects 2,600 inmates. But by the way, it saves the federal government $600 million over 5 years. They're like, where do I sign up? So it's just how we talk about this issue is really, really important. And the words that we use, the anecdotes and stories that we tell is how we're going to get people to come to the other side. And there's been a huge movement over the last decade. I mean, look at my parents, they're 80 and 82. My 82-year-old father, when I filed the bill in November, he's like, I don't want this. But I'm like, Dad, I use CBD for your back pain. I'm like, come on, come on. But then my 80-year-old mom, she's like, well, if I ever get sick, send me the best stuff. Well, 2 weeks ago, Mom got sick, diagnosed with multiple issues. And I'm so pissed off that in my state of South Carolina, a woman who's been given a grave diagnosis, that we can't get something that is literally a plant that can help her quality of life. I mean, I'm so angry about it that we aren't there yet. Hopefully South Carolina will get there soon on the medical side of it, but we're not the only ones, right? This is going on with millions of families across the country who don't have access to something that is not addictive, that could literally save their life.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a great point about South Carolina, your home state, that it is almost there. I think it just passed a House subcommittee, going to the full floor
of
vote.
the House.
Yeah, which is great. It's taken a long time, it sounds like, and there's been some friction. But I was just reading yesterday, MJ Biz Daily, which is a publication in the cannabis industry, mentioned that 3 of 4 Republican primary voters are pro-cannabis legalization in South Carolina. Medical legalization.
100%.
It's like what the people want. In your story about your mother and everyone has these
Die-hard
stories.
conservative Republicans. One's a veteran, one's a retired school teacher. I mean, people have just come so far. But that is quintessential. That is what's transpired over the last decade. The Compassionate Care Act in South Carolina, led by Republican State Senator Tom Davis, it has passed out of the state Senate. It just passed out of committee in the state House. It'll go to the full floor of the House here in the next couple of days or weeks. There are some people that are detractors. I've heard that someone's going to put 1,000 amendments on the bill to try to stop it from getting a vote. Well, it's going to get a vote. I don't care if you have 1,000 amendments on it. From what I hear, they're ready for it. And the crazy part is it's really who's paying who here. Mm-hmm. So, a couple years ago, one of the folks that is lobbying against the medical cannabis bill, the Compassionate Care Act, was a lobbyist for the cannabis industry. And it's just like, you were for this before, but all of a sudden now, because you're getting your paycheck from somewhere else, you're against it. I mean, that's kind of you see that going on sometimes. You just shake your head. And so I hope that it gets to the governor's desk for signage this year. I mean, it's past time to get it done. And in South Carolina, you're right. I polled medical. It's 3 out of 4 voters in South Carolina are for a medical card or medical cannabis. In my district, particularly, adult use is favored by the vast majority. 55% of voters in my district want adult use, recreational use. The state of South Carolina is probably the opposite of that. It's probably 45-55. But my district is a purple swing district. But then I polled recently, because I have a Republican primary election now in June. Mm-hmm. I polled my bill and states' rights, states having the right to determine the outcome on cannabis for their state. Guess what? It's favored by 2/3 of diehard ruby red conservative Republican primary voters. Like, the only place this is controversial is either at your state house or the U.S. or DC or at the Capitol. It's not controversial anywhere else. And if my parents are there, then everyone else's are too. It's just crazy that people are afraid of the issue, to tackle the issue, but it is wildly popular.
Seems like times are changing, I think. I think you're a testament to that. And you've been a fantastic catalyst for this industry.
Yes.
It's been really great to see, from, the other side of the aisle, mm-hmm. and just, fresh air, just all new. So are there others like yourself out there? Are we going to see more and more of this coming from the Republican side?
Yeah, I think you will. As we get through the summer and they win their primaries and they're not afraid to touch the issue, you'll see more Republican co-sponsors. I do want to give a shout out to Don Young. May God rest his soul in peace. He was my first original co-sponsor on the States Reform Act. He was an amazing human being, and I hope we have another great American like him to replace him one day when they have that election. But Brian Mast out of Florida, Tom McClintock out of California, Peter Meyer out of Michigan, all those folks, and Don Young. I mean, they've just been great champions of the issue and have really embraced it. As the original signers of that bill, it's been phenomenal to have them. We're going to add more as folks get through their primaries and as we give and provide data and information to members, because some members really, they don't have a full grasp of the issue. Like, for example, if you have an opioid epidemic in your state, one dispensary alone reduces opioid addiction and morbidity by over 17%.
Yes.
Like, just hearing that one line, and they're like, oh my God, send me the Journal of American Medicine article. Okay, like, can I get on the bill? Yes, it's not too late. So it's really a matter of educating people too, and showing them that this creates jobs, it is safe, violent crime does not go up, kids don't have more access than they already do today. And oh, by the way, you can fund educational programs through the taxes on this kind of thing to make sure kids are educated, to make the right decisions, to have community policing going on. I mean, there's just so many good things for our communities that can come out of this.
Really, thank you for everything you're doing,
yes.
and really changing the conversation on many levels. We really appreciate it. And thanks for joining us on the High Rise
and
today.
Thank you. If I can give a shout out to my website, nancymace.org, like spelled like the pepper spray, but sweeter, but nancymace.org. If folks can get on there and check us out and support us, we'd be eternally grateful.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners are going to be very touched by this interview. So thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.